Hi everyone, it's Kris Hicks, Head of Press and Communications at UKIP. I'm joined once again by Carl Benjamin, UKIP member. We're talking about the issues of the day. I think the next thing we need to talk about is the fact that the EU is sending out a lot of messages, certainly Mr Barnier and Mr Juncker, about how they don't actually really support an extension of Article 50. So what's going on here then?
Well, it's not even they don't even really support one. It's they seem to be openly against the idea. I mean, Politico have published an article today. Michel Barnier, Brexit extension for what? He says that the Brexit negotiation is over and the UK must now tell the EU what relationship it wants before asking for an extension on Article 50. I mean, what else is there to say?
Well, this very much echoes what Theresa May said in Parliament last night in her speech after she lost the vote on her withdrawal agreement once again. She said, look, if you are going to vote to extend, the EU will want to know what for. Is it going to be for a second referendum? Is it going to knock Article 50 off entirely? What do you want exactly? And one of my big fears is that this is quite possibly a play, in that we could end up with not an extension of Article 50, but even worse, we could see Article 50 totally cancelled.
And Theresa May did say, she threatened that, didn't she? You know, in Parliament, she said, you know, if we don't do our deal, her deal, sorry, then there could be the risk of no Brexit at all, which, I mean, I can't believe, I mean, she must understand at this point her political career is over.
Yes, I think so, but her career isn't.
Well, yes, her career outside of politics may well carry on.
Yes, indeed. Well, I mean, as we've seen from many prime ministers, they end up making a lot more money after they've been that than they are doing. So I'm sure there are many lucrative book deals waiting for her and speaking engagements, as many others in the past have found. And, you know, I suppose she would be a fascinating subject, certainly for the past, you know, over 2 years in terms of this experience. So, I mean, she's got very little to lose other than, of course, her reputation. But then again, that didn't stop Tony Blair, did it? So.
Speaking of Tony Blair, he was this week revealed to be in France, advising Emmanuel Macron, or Emmanuel the Great, as I like to call him, on how to keep Britain in the European Union, on how to, you know, literally prevent Brexit from happening. It's like, Tony, you know, what are you doing? I mean, I realise that you don't care about your reputation anymore, but, like, do you not think that actively working against the interests and the desires of the British public, I mean, I would consider that some sort of treason. What are you doing? Why are you working against the interests of your country? I could never envisage a situation where I would be actively working against the largest democratic vote in the history of the country. You know, I can't even envisage it. I would say, okay, well, even if I didn't agree, I'd say, well, you know, this is democracy. The vote has been cast. The die has been cast. You know, the vote has been done. We have to now follow this through, because otherwise we aren't a democratic state. And I think, honestly, it's very easy to just throw around that kind of rhetoric, but I am genuinely concerned about what it means in the future if we have these kind of, and it's very clear cut, the decision, leave or stay. The method wasn't in question, the end, the result was in question. What will the consequences of this be? And it was a very clear leave vote, and it's become even more clear from the public now through polling. So what will it mean in future if they just turn around and say, you know, we're not going to do this? We're just not going to do it. What does that mean?
Well, it means the total dissolution of a democratic mandate, an attack on the democracy of the people. But I mean, if we have, for example, if they go for a second referendum, we know that that's going to be a fudge as well.
Absolutely.
Because the question isn't going to be leave or stay again. No. It's going to be accept the not really leaving the EU deal or just stop Brexit.
Yes.
So, you know, the idea that of a people's vote is an utter nonsense. We already had a vote on this, and for them to kind of cloak it in the language of pro-democracy is, quite frankly, a disgrace, knowing what their real goals and concerns are. So, you know, it's looking very dark right now for Brexit. The next clear question is, well, will we have a European Parliament election if it is delayed? Well, according to the treaties, we are obliged to hold one. And indeed, I understand that Richard Tice and Leave Means Leave have threatened to sue the Electoral Commission if they do not actually run a European Parliament election.
So indeed, that's inevitably going to happen then?
Well, One thinks so. However, I've also contacted the Electoral Commission myself, and they told me that it wasn't the duty of the Electoral Commission to call an election, and actually is the duty of the British government to do that.
Right.
So we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, the European Union is very good at making up the rules as it goes along.
Yes.
Because I think the fundamental goal of the European Union is really to certainly stop Brexit, but also to make Brexit look dangerous and very difficult, because of course they're looking at all these other European nations who at the next European Parliament election will likely be returning anti-EU candidates throughout. So, you know, you could see a Grexit movement, a Frexit movement, trying to think what the German, the Deutschix.
Well, surely there can't be surely France and Germany can't leave the European Union.
Oh, well, if they did, it would definitely lead to the collapse.
Yeah, of course. But you know, the Dutch, I know that, you know, there's quite strong anti-European, anti-EU sentiment there, and this is Guy Verhofstadt's one of his tweets that went quite far. He said, "I've always said that Brexit is also a failure of the European Union." Now that's just the first line of it, but that honestly, I've actually come to respect Guy Verhofstadt more than most of the other prominent EU figures in the Brexit negotiations, just because of how openly power hungry he is, and how openly European nationalist, as you described it when we were talking before. He is a European nationalist. He wants to create the European superstate. He wants, as in his own words, the empire, and he wants to be able to project power outside of Europe. He wants to consolidate this. He wants to be able to raise taxes. The Germans this week have proposed creating a pan-European supercarrier, like for military exercises outside of Europe. It's very obvious that they want Europe to be a competitive,
a superpower.
A superpower, yeah. I don't want to call it an empire because that's the wrong kind of phraseology. But they want it to be an international superpower to compete with the United States and China. I personally think that's a terrible idea. I don't see why we should compete with the United States in this regard. I don't see why we wouldn't just work with them, because effectively they're advancing the goals that theoretically Guy Verhofstadt would be in favour of anyway. You know, the advance of liberal civilization around the world.
But you've got to remember as well, there's this kind of underlining anti-Americanism in a lot of European politics, and a great degree of resentment, certainly even in regards to the Second World War, and I think the reliance on the United States really to have saved the continent from Nazi Germany.
From itself,
from itself, quite. And of course there's the continuing Russophobia, Sinophobia as well. I mean, plenty of very real phobias going on in the EU, and this is what really pushes the kind of EU nationalism. But you are right. I mean, at the very least, Guy Verhofstadt is very honest that he is an EU nationalist, that he doesn't like the existing nation states of Europe. And, you know, his answer is always the same, isn't it? You know, if there's a problem with the European Union,
centralisation.
we need more European Union. Yeah.
I'm actually, like I said, I'm so pleased that he is so transparent in the political science that he espouses. I mean, there are so many clips of him just standing in the European Parliament, beating his chest and yelling how we need more powers transferred to Europe, more centralisation, more sovereignty transferred. The European Union needs to be able to raise taxes, raise armies, you know, consolidate its borders, consolidate its banking system. He's very open about all of this, and that is openly honest, where the other European representatives will say, well, I mean, they'll try and obfuscate it. At least Verhofstadt is just crystal clear on these things.
Yeah, Verhofstadt is an excellent Leave campaigner.
He has done us the world of good. And he says the place of the United Kingdom is in the European Union, which that's his next sentence in this one tweet that contains so much. And I find that to be very strange, because that to me just strikes me as being a very ideological stance, you know, because I mean, in his opinion, obviously everything in Europe should be in the European Union. But I think it's obvious that the British have always been very Eurosceptic and very tentative about the idea of European consolidation, and we've resisted it at every turn. And so the idea that, and then we're the country who voted to leave, you know, one of the three core countries that voted to leave. And, you know, so him saying this, that's just rhetoric. But he then says, I am sure a younger generation will one day take another decision and bring Britain back into the European family. That just strikes me as wishful thinking.
Well, I think it's certainly wishful thinking, and he certainly hasn't seen the studies on Generation Z, has he?
No.
So I think he's in for a bit of a shock in that on that front. I mean, I've always said this. I'd be surprised if the European Union actually exists in the next 20 years.
I agree.
mean, the way the economy is moving there, the state of the euro euro, really everything, how the southern portion of the European Union is totally out of sync with the north, how it's all dependent really on the German economy and German banking, and more German nationals are waking up to this. They don't want to be the tax cow of Europe funding the rest of the continent. They want to build their economy as they have in the past and be the success they've brought it to since the collapse of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, and you can't fault them for their success and their industriousness. There's no question of it. But the problem that the European Union will always have, and it's like this irreconcilable contradiction they're just going to continue on with, is the fact that they're expecting Greece to be as productive as Germany in order to compete with the same currency. Otherwise, Greece is always trapped in this position where it's effectively in a depressed state that it can't escape from. And I guess most people just aren't as hardworking as the Germans, frankly, and I think that's a fair thing to say. But at the end of the day, it's not really fair to trap them in a union where they are expected to be. No one suggests that you have to be as industrious as the Germans. It's different horses for different courses, I would say. But it is one of those things where I think that the internal contradictions of it are going to just continue to increase. I don't see how they're going to be ameliorated in any way, shape, or form. And I like the previous French finance minister. One of the things he said shortly after the Brexit referendum was successful was, well, Britain now has a responsibility not to destroy Europe on its way out. Because one of the things that always frustrates me is when the Remainers, or I think I'm just going to call them the traitors. I'm not joking.
Please do, Abby. We do it in the party all the time.
But I mean, it's unfair, But one of the things they always say is, "Oh, well, look at the size of the European Union. Look at the strength of it." And it's like, well, you can say that, and on paper that does appear to be true, but the fault lines within the European Union are very strong and very deep, and the structure itself is not really very secure, which is why Guy Verhofstadt is constantly arguing for more power. They want the army, they want all of this integration to make it more firm, because at the moment it is actually quite a vulnerable organisation. And I mean, I just can't see it going on forever like this. No. It would not surprise me if I were in charge of Brexit, I would be doing everything I could to undermine the European Union as an institution so that European nations can get their own sovereignty back whether they like it or not, frankly. But at the end of the day, I don't see that there will be a long-term future for the EU as it exists now.
Yeah, precisely, and this is why we're seeing so much of this accelerationism at the moment, because they know that they are in a vulnerable state. What concerns me certainly about the acceleration is the Lisbon Treaty, which actually calls within the text for all EU member nations, hopefully, to be part of the Euro by 2020. Yes. Now, of course, that's next year, in case anyone was wondering. Now, if Britain's not out of the European Union at that point, which may be a realistic prospect based on what's happening, then what happens then? I guess we've got to sacrifice the pound, which, that's the one thing the Conservatives did right. Never adopt the euro. Absolutely. Well, it's in UKIP's logo. It's the pound sign logo. That's where it was born, because the pound is the fundamental mark of sovereignty. A nation's currency is its mark of sovereignty. It's about economic independence and autonomy. And if we lose that, well, I think it's really all over. Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. And the thing is, it's got symbolic power as well. It's, how long have we had the pound? Like, how long has England used the pound? It goes right back to medieval times, like, to the earliest stages of England being a sovereign country, and Britain as well, obviously. And a lot of people, myself, I always thought, the pound sign is the logo for UKIP. That's a bit cheesy, isn't it? But honestly, the more and more we carry on down this road, the more and more I think, no, that's a good thing. It's that's a statement, and I think is a very, one that is necessary. I think these sort of symbolic statements are becoming necessary these days. Keep the pound. Yeah.